Okay, welcome back. Yeah, I'm really excited to start this series. I'm looking forward to really getting creative, getting intellectual, using my brain. I feel like one thing I really liked about school was using my brain. Yeah, I'm just really, really excited to begin sort of just putting my voice out there and seeing what comes of it. I'm really interested in various topics and just culture, technology, art. I'm just interested, y'all, and I'm looking forward to making a point, making a no points, just rambling. So recently I came across some discussion about, generative AI, and it really seems to be the hottest topic, especially if you're like in any sort of tech world, or honestly just really it has honestly taken the world by storm, in my opinion, regardless of whether you're in the tech world or not. And there has just been lots of discussion about like what AI is, as I do it all in quotation marks. And when I think of AI, I'm just like, oh my God, the Terminator and like, those robots and iRobot and like, Her, the movie Her, and just like an actual artificial person who has like their own personality that's like one day gonna take over the world and like kill us and replace us, God willing. Just kidding, hopefully not. We're really seeing the ways in which, artificial intelligence, whatever that means, is impacting various different areas in the world. And really specifically, the discussions that I've been a part of have been like art. Like, what are the ways that artificial intelligence are impacting art? There is just like a bunch of jargon that makes, this sort of conversation difficult to enter, at least for me. It's like, they use language, and the structure of the conversation is such that it's just not easy for a casual person to participate in, and I think that's unfair. I think we should be thinking about all of these things and thinking of the ways that our opinions matter. And I don't know, I love squinting. So, through my initial research and just through my like initial thoughts, I think there's always been and hopefully this is on, I think there's always been a relationship between technology and art. And, for me, technology's purpose is to generally, obviously not all the times, and it obviously isn't applied in real life, generally make lives better for people. Like, I don't think people in the 1920s were thinking of all these advancements that we've made, and like that, humans are working more at a larger scale than at any other period in time. So it's just like, what are we continuing to make these technological advancements for, if not to better the life of humans? It almost seems like we're just making our lives more complicated and more work focused. So it's interesting to think about technology and art and the ways that, hopefully technology will make art better and more accessible. And, my basis of this whole conversation is that technology should, and, maybe there isn't even a way to interrupt that relationship between technology and art, but technology should have a close relationship with art, and it should make life for the artist better, life for the consumer better, and just, make art a more accessible and easier to digest medium. Personally, I intertwine media and art. So how many times can I say art? Art. I think throughout this video, we're going to have to like really get on the same page on a lot of various different topics, and like I said, I'm no expert in any of this. I don't even consider myself to be a technologist or anything of that nature. I'm just someone with the access to the internet and love to share my opinion. So I thought it would be better if I would show you rather than tell you. I mean, either way, I'm telling you, but I think a visual representation is super helpful. So here's my super sophisticated image that I got outsourced by Generative AI. Just kidding. I drew this on myself. And I think this is a really helpful visualization to really get to the bare bones of what we're talking about here. And what we're talking about here is generative AI. And I think in most spaces when you're hearing AI, and honestly these days, like I mentioned, it's such a buzzword that means literally anything and everything. Like if your computer does something, it's AI. Like, okay, we got it. But when you're thinking about programs like ChatGPT or things of that nature, we're thinking about generative AI. And so let's just think about it in these really, really, really simple concepts, which are the only ones that I can explain. Essentially, you have this middle image, this middle square that says generative AI. That's your generative AI program, okay? And then your generative AI program yields certain results that you see on your left-hand side. So that's those 3 R's on the left-hand side. But the program doesn't yield those results unless the prompter, you in the middle with the unibrow pointing to the lines, you have to prompt the program to yield a result, right? And the way that the program in the middle knows what you're looking for on the left is that it is trained on training data. So whether it's images, text, a bunch of file and data is poured into in the middle image in order to give the user, there you in the middle, what the program thinks you want as a result. And on the bottom, you can see that there's a bunch of code running in the background that is what is happening in the background to yield the result on the left. So let's get a really official definition, and that's the one you see on your screen, thanks to IBM Research. Thank you. So essentially, what generative AI is defined as is a deep learning model that can generate high quality text, images, and other content based on data they were trained on. And so basically, this is referencing exactly the wonderful image that I created earlier. And to just unpack this a little bit, models are essentially computer programs. And what computer programs are lines of code that tell a computer to execute a certain function, to do a certain task. And just like the image again, I referenced the program must be trained on the data. So it must collect that data somehow, one way or another, download into the program, and so that I can synthesize that information and make predictions based on the input that you put in as the prompter. So that's how it makes decisions on what you want, what kind of image you want to see, or what kind of response the program thinks you're looking for. Generative AI is really about the most probable output. So based on what I'm putting in as the prompter, what is the most probable thing I'm looking for? And I think in very simple terms, you can think about like when you're texting on iMessage and the iMessage app offers you the next word or the next 2 words. And that is like a smaller scale version of what generative AI is, because the app is trained on so much of your texting data and the world's texting data. It's making an assumption that based on the last 3 words that you use, the next word is going to be blank. So in that same line of reasoning, based on whatever prompt I give to this program, it's going to produce a picture based on those words. Whatever. To me, it is immediately jumping out. Like, how are you obtaining all of this data? And if we know anything about corporations in America, it's probably not in a really nice and friendly way. I would highly doubt that. And how are you making money off of this tool? Like, companies don't do things just for the fun of it and just for the objective good and value that it adds to society. There's obviously very clearly a monetary gain to be had. So to me, clearly something very bad is happening to collect this data. Not very bad, but in my mind. And there's some real world examples. So there is this AI company called Stability AI. They have a text to image tool like we've been describing that's called Stable Diffusion. And there is currently a lawsuit out against them that claims that Stability downloaded and otherwise acquired billions, billions, billions of copyrighted images without permission to create Stable Diffusion. Like, to me, that's crazy. Like, how can you... I think I'm jumping ahead, but so much pressure and responsibility is given onto just everyday people in America that for you to do something so reckless and try to make money off of that is super bold and just very telling. And these training images were acquired without consent and without compensation. If one thing we know about America is that they want to make a buck by any means necessary. And then when someone is like me, if I were to use Stability AI and try to create images, I'm now creating images based off of the work of other artists, and that's messed up. It's fucked up. These companies now benefit commercially and greatly off of the use of these copyrighted images. There's two things to think here. For one, you can think of the access to art is super inaccessible. Art in some ways is its own pretentious field with its own barriers to entry. So making art accessible to people in this way can be seen as a good thing if you're kind of looking at these things generally. Especially if you're someone who, a small business or an individual contributor, and for one reason or another, you need some sort of art or media, I can see why it would be really intriguing and enticing to use this kind of thing. You don't have to deal with the BS of partnering with someone else and all that entails with working with another human. You can obviously get this at a much lower rate. And honestly, a lot of this work is super high quality. So I can see why that's really enticing to some people. And I honestly think, you can't blame people who are already strapped for cash and who are already, struggling to function day to day and, keep a roof over their heads when it's so impossible to live in America in some places that... when things are a little bit less essential, that they choose to take the cheapest route. I don't think that it's correct. I think it makes sense that someone who is looking for something like this would take this route. So we're not going to sit around all day and wait for corporations to act as good corporate citizens. And they've never shown us to do that. And why would we expect that? So it is really messed up that they're stealing these people's work and they're profiting off of. And this is honestly where I think it becomes that just because something is the law doesn't mean it makes it the right thing or the morally correct thing to do. And we have to examine who are the people who are making these laws and applying these laws and enforcing these laws. And I think there is a lot to say about how maybe generative AI can be a positive thing, even for artists. I think that a world with more art and more creative people is a better world. And maybe that's just my subjective opinion. But I think this type of technology facilitates that, where we do have that kind of world. And I do see the ways that in which technologies like this can improve this section of the world. But I think when government bodies and just capitalism infiltrate, that's when issues arise, because there's always got to be some sort of monetary gain at the end. And, I believe that the legal framework protects corporations and it protects profit at the expense of humans and at the expense of creativity. And I'm seriously interested in making sure that the right people are there to capture all the requirements to make the legal system work in favor for the artist, but I honestly highly doubt that. Like I said earlier in the video, I feel like the legal infrastructure of America is such that to benefit and protect the interests of corporations and profit, and we are as humans just a way to facilitate that for those corporations. We are simply the cattle in the farm, and the farm is what is utmost protection. Thinking about the ways that other technologies have impacted other forms of art and, specifically media, I think we have a real, significant challenge ahead of us when it comes to artists in the not in the technology space, but just artists who are using technology, artists who are trying to make a living off their work, and it's a tough job. So I am really interested to see where the future holds. Like, for example, let's talk about streaming and the implications that it's had on the TV and movie business. So obviously, I don't need to explain this, but streaming media is an alternative way for viewers to consume movies and television. You can also think about music in this way, but I'm mostly for now going to think about it movies and TV. And streaming really became super prevalent when Netflix came about. And honestly, I can remember when Netflix came out as a teenager, and at the time, I don't know, it was kind of impactful because I was fascinated and hypnotized by the idea that I could watch a whole series, not just series, literally season 1 through 8 in one day. And not one day, but just I had the ability to do that. And I also had the ability to watch what seemed like an endless amount of movies. And I think at the time, the subscription was like $12.99, maybe less than $10. I don't remember, but I remember being in middle school and getting Netflix and being like, whoa, I watched all of Pretty Little Liars literally in like less than a week. Less than a week, then like less than a month. That was like I don't know how many seasons at the time, but it was a lot. I was able to watch Desperate Housewives in like a really short amount of time. And then I was able to catch up with Game of Thrones at that time, which was like probably like, I don't know, like 4 seasons deep in like less than a month. So I think it really changed the way I consume media and as a result, changed the way the business produces media. Little did we know, like, I feel like, in the past, a movie would come out like when I was a teenager, and it almost felt like you'd have to wait like a whole year for it to come out in any sort of way that was not at the theaters. Like if you had to just wait and then or maybe watch it would be play extended at the theater. You'd have to go to the theater again. And now a movie like Anyone But You comes out and it's seen, or like last year, I feel like it was like Megan or stuff. Like you literally would watch it in the theaters, or like you didn't even have to watch it in the theaters. And like 4 weeks later, literally 6 weeks later, it's available on Apple TV for streaming, So I don't think that was an intended consequence or intended result of streaming, but I think streaming has had a major impact on the movie business, and I think in ways that movie creators and the business of movies don't like. Honestly, I think back in the day, like obviously things were super impacted by COVID and the effects that it had on people's watching habits, but I feel like at the age of like the Marvel stuff, like when Endgame came out and like, all the years leading up to that moment, it seemed like monthly a movie was making $1 billion. $1 billion. That's 999 million plus 1 million. That's a lot of money. And I think, nowadays it's way less often that a movie makes $1 billion. And I think part of it is like the pandemic. Clearly, I think people's habits have changed, but also I genuinely think it's a consequence of streaming. Now, I don't have to wait for the movies to see. Now I don't have to wait until I go to the movie theaters to see content that's like movie level. They're releasing nowadays like 8-hour movies. Like, some shows are so good, less and less often these days, honestly. Like I think Netflix has a quality problem, genuinely. I'm thinking Avatar: The Last Airbender. I hate to say it, but I don't know. I just hold that series so closely to my heart. But still, I have 8 hours of content to watch, and I'm already paying for it. You know, like why would I go out of my way to watch a movie? And you know, the advancements of streaming and streaming habits have definitely impacted people in front of and behind the scenes. You know, I think obviously it's still part now, but like before, it was very clear that if your movie made X amount of dollars, you could be a part of a contract that says that, you know, I will take X percentage of the gross makings of this movie, or, you know, I will take X percentage of the blah 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 blah, like so on and so forth. What I'm saying is that how much money they made is really easily and readily available still to this day. But now with streaming, where people are paying a one-time service per month, it's becoming increasingly unclear the financial impact that these shows have. Like if you even notice, like it's very rare for a show that's going to be streaming, especially on Netflix, to be advertised very like heavily. I think Netflix just advertises itself as a subscription service and doesn't really bet on any one, you know, show or series. You know, I'm sure there's other things that you can think of, like maybe the Wednesday show, probably Stranger Things is a big hit, or back in the day, maybe Orange is the New Black. But, you know, for the most part, they just advertise themselves. And how do we determine with streaming the financial impact it's having, or how the impact of one particular movie is having? I think there are some metric with like Nielsen's, and I think Netflix has some metrics where you see the views, but what does that really mean? And, you know, part of the conversation can be like, oh, these are like A-list celebrity actors, like they're already making enough money, like who cares? And I do wholeheartedly agree with that. But I think most actors are not those people, and most working actors aren't those people and never will be those people. So people who are like part of SAG-AFTRA, which is like the union for actors and talent, I think both in front of and behind the camera. I think it's just actors, actually. I think behind the screen talent is a different union. But, you know, the different workers that work on a movie or show are represented by unions, and these unions draw up contracts with the studios that determine the rate and the ways that these that the talent will get paid. And it used to be that like if your show made syndication, that you would just be set for life, like the folks from Friends, the folks from Seinfeld, and that you would get paid every time that show went on air. And now that's definitely not the case. Now studios, I guess Netflix is kind of like a studio because they make their own content, but Netflix can just withhold all that information, pay you a lump sum in the beginning, and I'm sure that's probably still a lot, but they're still making money off of you. In some ways, in perpetuity, they own that work, so they can just release it for however long they want. And if that's what's keeping you on the subscription service, then they're definitely making money off of you. You might be like, well, just get another type of job, or, you know, well, that's just the nature of the business. But that is just so like, I don't know what that is. That is just so like a apologist attitude. Like just because something is that way and has been that way, it doesn't mean it should be that way. And you know, of course, streaming is such a convenience for everyone. You know, like I don't really watch TV that much, honestly. I think I watch YouTube way more, and TikTok. I'll watch a show here and there, but I actually recently just ended all my subscriptions except for Netflix, because I was like, I don't really use any of these. I honestly, whoever's listening out there, which is probably no one, I'm more open to buying things a la carte. Like I feel like what I use more now is like Apple TV, and I like supporting a show or a TV in that way. And it's all to say that, like, of course we all love streaming, but I think, and you know, maybe this doesn't impact everyone, but I think we need to think of the ways that corporations and, you know, America is just taking advantage of us. And that's just such a recent example of the way that technology has made such a huge ripple effect in industry, you know. And I think we see the glitz and glamour of Hollywood folk, and like, why would I care about that? But I think it is true that this impacts a lot of people who aren't necessarily living that life. You know, I think we see the top 1% because that's what sells in the media, but I think there are being people who are being impacted. And then similarly, we're in a very similar stage that we were 10 years ago with streaming with generative AI. We're barely now seeing like what it can actually do, the ways it can actually be harnessed in art and in media, and you know, what are the implications 10 years from now? Like, how are the behaviors of humans going to change? And is it going to be difficult to determine whether some art was generatively created with AI? Does that matter? You know, there's a lot to ponder.